It seems that, according to the British government, everything, including homelessness, is connected to Brexit. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, the man in charge of the economy, says an end to years of austerity will depend on whether the UK secures a deal on its withdrawal from the European Union. He claims that if Britain fails to reach a deal on Brexit, the country must reverse plans to stop a decade of budget cuts and financial hardship. This would have real effects for millions of people.
According to a report by a British newspaper, government welfare reforms are fueling a rise in homelessness in towns and cities across Britain. The Observer newspaper claims that more and more people have become unable to afford homes as a result of government cuts to social housing benefits and the shift to lump sum payments in the universal credit system. The Observer said it had interviewed homeless charities across England, where they said universal credit was a major factor in causing destitution and rough sleeping. There have been many claims that the poorest in society are partly suffering because of changes in how benefits are being paid. Universal credit, which came into force in 2013, is meant to replace a six-tier benefits system. But the complexity of that system is blamed for making poverty and the risk of homelessness even worse, leading to an increase in applications for social housing. Universal credit has been accused by parliamentarians for increasing debt, rent arrears and food bank use across the UK.
Are the new arrangements in relation to benefits payments causing increased debt and rent problems? And what is the solution to the challenge of homelessness in the UK? Simple questions with important answers. What is the public's opinion regarding the huge rise in homelessness? We asked them. Here's what they said.
I think it's more to do with perhaps people not being integrated into society.
I think there's a lack of investment in social care. There's a disconnect between the NHS and social care, and you've got people who perhaps need help and are not getting it and therefore fall outside the net.
Too much immigration. No housing left for English people or the indigenous population.
We're now getting more and more people out of work. We're getting more and more people working on the minimum wage, and I think that contributes to it. And also, the lack of funding for mental health does have a bearing on all this.
People in this day and age shouldn't be left homeless on the streets.
It'd be nice to see something done. I'm not quite sure why there's so many people on the streets nowadays.
I think it's more of an internal issue rather than external, and the Leon makes it like it's an external issue.
It's unfortunate, and I think there should be policy decisions made to combat it.
I suspect it's on the rise. I think it should be prevented.
The current system, they have no any, a place to redress their issues.
Well, this is disgraceful. Every night in London, there are 3,000 people who are homeless. They're sleeping out on the streets, and the weather is closing in. Now, this is particularly disgraceful because the problem has been solved in the past. But at the moment, it is not going to be solved because we have a financial system which essentially will always serve the interests of a rich elite and will not serve the interests of the bulk of the population. There is also another aspect to it, which is that the solution, which we'll develop later, actually relies on a challenge to the financial system, and the politicians are constrained. They're actually stopped from making that challenge for two reasons. Therefore, the situation is not going to change at this moment.
The British state has a legal responsibility to assist homeless people, yet despite that there are 300,000 homeless people today in the UK according to the charity Shelter. That is absolutely shameful. That is absolutely intolerable. And we find the British government and successive governments not really taking any proper steps to completely eliminate homelessness. Now, of course, how can Britain keep on projecting itself to the world as civilised when there are such vast numbers of homeless people? There should not be one individual living rough on the streets. Until this government and until the next government take steps to completely eradicate homelessness in the UK, then British politicians and British journalists do not have a leg to stand on in arguing that Britain is civilised.
An investigation published by the Observer newspaper said that more and more people have become unable to afford homes as a result of government cuts. What's the public's view?
I'd like to see the data on that, but if that's the case, then of course it's got to be addressed.
For sure. And it's a linkage over a number of years where there's been underinvestment, and often NHS trusts and other bodies have been tasked with doing certain things but not provided the funding to carry it out.
We give too much away to the EU. They steal from this country for the last 32 years, and thank God it's coming to an end.
I don't think it's the cuts as such. I think the population's getting bigger and bigger. We haven't got the space, but the people that buy these spaces charge ridiculous amount of rent, and people just haven't got the money, so they end up being on the streets.
I believe it is to do with government cuts. I think they spend it all on the wrong things.
I think the government, if it is due to the government cuts, then government does need to look into it seriously and not just turn a blind eye or ignore all these things. Otherwise, the situation just gets worse.
As well as you see a lot of government cuts happening, you see a lot of people getting back into work, you see a lot of people jumping on education, they're going back to college, they're going back to universities. So somehow that's good, you know.
Yeah, I think there should be conscious governmental policy, like I said, to curb it and keep it in check and ensure that it doesn't rise over a period of time. And also I think it requires a citizens' initiative because it can't be left to the government alone, of course.
I think that's concerning.
Austerity making people, the situation that these people are ending up in NHS and other stuff. So it's affecting more, in home people than homeless people, for my opinion.
This is exacerbating the situation. Welfare benefits are being cut, and particularly the housing allowance. But at the same time, the housing market has become extraordinary, again, because it's serving the interests of a tiny elite. Around here, where we are now, a small studio flat will cost about £600,000. And looking at the country as a whole, the price of houses is roughly 10 times average earnings, where it used to be in the past roughly 3 times. In other words, housing has gone completely beyond the capacity of the bulk of the population to afford that. And if you go around here in the poorer blocks, and we're actually in one as this interview is being filmed, a 2-bedroom flat round here commands a monthly rate of about £1,200. That's £300 a week. Again, it's completely beyond the capacity of most people.
First things first, homelessness in the UK was growing under Tony Blair and then his successor, Gordon Brown, and that has been clearly established. However, the rate of homelessness has increased dramatically since 2010. And of course in 2010 we had the coalition government in which David Cameron was Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister was Nick Clegg, and the Conservative-led coalition government embarked on a programme of austerity measures, some of the fiercest, some of the most brutal austerity measures that Britain has ever known. And now, after 9 years or so of austerity measures, which are not coming to an end, we see nearly 300,000 people in the UK homeless. Now that figure really is a direct consequence of those austerity measures. So that is something that the government firstly has to recognise and secondly has to rectify.
MPs have threatened that they will force the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, to rethink policies and provide new alternatives. What does the public hope to see in the future?
I want to know what percentage are unfortunate and what percentage choose the life with the associated troubled life that brings.
Mental health has now become, to coin a phrase, flavour of the month. But it'd be interesting to see the real investment that gets carried through, the real new money, the real way it's spent.
At the end of the day, this country's been in austerity since I've been at work. As soon as they get in a bit of trouble, it's the working class people of this country that suffer for it.
It's to pay people and what the unscrupulous bosses do. They open a warehouse up, get agency people in, pay them £8 an hour. That's the problem.
Put more money into finding places for homeless to live.
I couldn't really comment in a fair way about that, really, to be honest with you.
I think it's just a catastrophic problem, all around the world. And I think obviously that needs to be dealt with again.
It's unfortunate. I mean, most of them make promises, but they have a lot of they have promises to keep. They don't act on what they say.
I think the policy should be evidence-based, and it's not clear that the policies are evidence-based. That includes economic policy, that includes health policy, that includes policy relating to homelessness. If they're evidence-based, people on the left and the right can agree with the policies.
They have money for others, but this is like basic human rights they're ignoring.
They're not going to do it. And the two reasons why they're not going to do it is firstly there are two reasons why MPs don't show the courage to challenge the big issues, foreign policy and this one on the housing policy. If anyone queries the expansion of Israel into the lands of others, they immediately, which is an objection to Zionism, they're immediately accused of being anti-Semite. And if any MP actually questions the way the financial system operates, they are also accused of being anti-Semite, and their careers are in fact smashed. And even the most radical of the members of Parliament in the Labour Party are not prepared to query the financial system. At its essence, you must be prepared to openly say that by borrowing via the present financial system, you are incurring a cost of a new building roughly 2 or 3 times higher than it need to be.
With all due respect to the demands of those MPs, which I believe more or less are admirable, I don't think there's going to be any backtracking from the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. He has clearly laid out the government's programme for the economy for the next year. He has said that austerity is, quote, coming to an end. He hasn't said it has come to an end. He said it is coming to an end. And I think whatever Labour MPs, Liberal Democrat MPs, and even some Conservative backbenchers, whatever they say, there is going to be no shift in government policy. And the question then is, when will austerity actually end? Will it end in 2020? Will it end in 2021? When the Chancellor says austerity is coming to an end, when? That's the question that MPs should be asking him, and regrettably, they haven't put that question to him.
Let's look at the poverty and housing statistics. According to the independent fact group Full Fact, around 59,000 households were accepted by councils as entitled to be housed in 2016 to 2017, a rise since 2009-10 of almost 50%. At the end of 2017, 79,000 households were in temporary accommodation. This is 4% higher than the same time in 2016. In 2005-6, fewer than 3,000 food supplies were provided by the Trussell Trust, Britain's largest food bank operator. In 2016-2017, the number of parcels handed out was almost 1.2 million.
Various voices in British Parliament have said that universal credit was responsible for increased debt, rent arrears and food bank use across the UK. What are the public's thoughts?
It's a terrible state of affairs if this is the case. But once people get to know, perhaps things can start happening.
From a distance, I suspect universal credit is to simplify administration, and overall I believe it's there to reduce costs, and it probably doesn't consider all the people it's targeted at in their best interests.
If we can give away £20 billion a year in foreign aid, I'm sure we can find the money for these people.
It's complicated, and if you're on a low income and you need help, at least these people are trying to work. Make it easy for them. Make them live on a livable wage. Living on £8 an hour isn't a livable wage. Make it easy for them to get people working.
Yeah, I think everybody's really confused by it all, and I think they should make it easier for people to understand.
One has to look at both sides of the situation. There are people who don't use the system as it should be, and there are people who genuinely need the help financially, which presumably is what universal credit is trying to do, and it would appear that what they're given based on that system isn't sufficient.
That there have to be changes across the board, including increasing jobs.
Again, concerning. I don't know the details, but it's concerning, especially if it's true.
Universal credit is not very clear. What they are, offering. This is like every researcher, is coming out that is harming family, is harming, putting people in debt.
The administrative revision of the universal credit system has taken place incompetently, and at the same time the actual benefits have been cut. And the result of that is that people on welfare benefit are being screwed and cannot even pay their rent. They're basically being faced with a choice, for example, to move out of London to a seaside town where there isn't any work. So it is an inept, incompetent administrative revision, plus lowering the rates. And in a situation where the supply of housing is only available to people from the outside. Round here, all these new flats that you can see are actually being bought as bolt holes, but very often for corrupt foreign owners who can pay these vast sums of money for the prices round here. But the combination of inept and incompetence and cutting the rates means that most people are now priced out of the housing market.
I have spoken to a number of people who work for charities which exist to look after homeless people and to try and eradicate homelessness. And certainly what they have told me is that universal credit is not the sole reason for so many people being homeless in the UK, but it is a major factor. And I asked them if they could explain that. Now, what they said was this, is that universal credit is the product of the government's welfare reforms. In theory, it sounds fine, but in reality, what it often means is that people living in rented accommodation do not get their universal credit, do not receive their payments on time. Apparently, it can take weeks and weeks. And because of that, the landlord loses patience and says to them, if I do not receive the payment, the rent, tomorrow or the day after that, then you're out on the streets. Those people still do not receive their universal credit, their payments. So what happens? They end up on the streets. The landlord, putting it crudely, kicks them out. So it does seem that universal credit is a major factor, but regrettably the government has shown no sign, there's certainly no willingness on behalf of the government to re-look the situation regarding universal credit. So the fact that they're not going to reassess universal credit means there are going to be more and more people becoming homeless. We really need to listen to charities which exist to look after homeless people. They are the authorities, they are the ones on the front line, not ministers.
What does the public think is the solution regarding the rise of homelessness in the UK?
It's something's got to be done about it because it's getting worse.
I think a combination of the factors there. It's a society-wide issue. The better funding for support in other areas. I don't know if house prices have got anything to do with it, and whether it's supply and demand or whether that pushes more people into rental, creates more financial pressure, which in turn has that knock-on effect where people then end up homeless. I don't know really. It's a big question.
Get out the EU and all EU citizens sent back home.
You've got to look at these people that are charging ridiculous amount of rent. More and more people are having their houses taken away. More and more people can't afford the rents. Get affordable housing. If you're going to pump money into it, get the mental health issues sorted out as well.
Put more money into affordable housing and give more money to mental health, which I think adds to the homelessness.
From personal observation, I see a lot of people, immigrants, possibly due to, I am an immigrant myself, but possibly due to problems where they're coming from. I don't think people want to leave a country and come and sleep on the streets in another country on purpose.
I think how they went hard on cutting the cuts and then everyone to education and stuff.
Immigration could be seen as one problem, and also the fact that there aren't enough jobs for the people. They're incommensurate. So more job creation, policy, a sort of policy change, a citizens' initiative. I'm hoping it can all come together in the right way to address this problem.
I'm afraid I don't know, but I suspect that the evidence is probably out there on what to do. It's just a case of using that evidence.
I think every council need to look after their every citizen, not abandon them in a capital or to throw them in big cities.
There is a solution if only the MPs, and I'm here, even the Labour Party is not prepared to grasp it. It is simply this, and this is not a new solution. It's been used before and it can be easily used again. Money is actually created by pressing buttons. And then you can have an administrative charge and interest added. And if it's compound interest, the amount you borrow starts going up like this. But if the National Bank creates that money as, again, a loan, but without interest, with a tiny 1/4 or 0.5% administration charge, then that money can be used to fund the building of a vast amount of social housing. At the moment, it's all lies about social rents and affordable rents. They're not. It's not social housing. It's not being built, and the rents are not affordable. We need a major policy of social housing funded by interest-free loans from the National Bank. That policy, by the way, can be used in all sorts of other positive and inventive ways. But here, it is the one solution for the housing crisis affecting the majority of the population.
I believe that the duty of government is to ensure, first and foremost, the welfare of its people, and that means making sure that there is not one homeless person on the streets in towns and cities of Britain. And there is money. We all know that in 2010 there had to be substantial spending cuts. Everyone recognised that. However, you do not make blanket cuts, because blanket cuts will affect the most vulnerable in society, and that is what we are seeing. So it's a matter of priorities. The British government does have money. The evidence is that it has billions, tens of billions of pounds for the Trident programme. Now imagine if they devoted the tens of billions of pounds for the Trident programme to eradicating homelessness in Britain. They could do it within a very, very short period of time. But as I said, it's a matter of priorities. My priority would be to ensure no one lives on the streets, no one is homeless in Britain. But alas, the priorities of this government, and it has to be said, the previous Labour governments as well, their priorities were very, very different. There is money, and if Britain is going to call itself a civilised, humane country, then it needs to make sure that money goes to ensuring that every person in the UK has a roof over their head.
After the economic crash in 2008, there was a measurable decline in the average standard of living in the United Kingdom. This affected the poorest the most. Despite this, the Chancellor's budget statement contained little hope for a significant improvement in the standard of living for those in greatest need in Britain.
One charity called Thames Reach has claimed that universal credit, which came into force in 2013 and was meant to replace a 6-tier benefit system, has been the main reason for a third of its clients losing their homes and applying for social housing. It seems that, whatever the Chancellor says, for the least wealthy, austerity continues. Smooth words in Parliament are no substitute for hard cash in pockets. And as far as hundreds of thousands of British citizens facing poverty and homelessness are concerned, the money they so badly need just isn't there.